He broke my heart, so I broke his bank account. I was supposed to be the perfect bride, the perfect heiress, the woman who had it all. Until he, the man I loved, humiliated me in front of everyone. He chose another woman, shattered my reputation, and thought I'd quietly disappear. Too bad for him. I don't break. Instead, I smiled, toasted to my freedom, and plotted my revenge. Now, I'm not just moving on, I'm taking everything he thought he could keep. His business, his reputation, his power, and the best part? He never saw it coming. Watch till the end to see how I turned heartbreak into my greatest victory. Silly story begins. Please like and subscribe. My father always threw extravagant parties, the kind that made the front page of every society magazine, where billionaires, politicians, and socialites gathered in designer gowns to sip champagne and pretend they didn't secretly hate each other. This year's gala, celebrating his 60th birthday, was no different. The Lancaster estate glittered under the soft golden glow of chandeliers, and the air smelled of roses, caviar, and wealth. And of course, scandal. But I didn't know that yet. I adjusted the strap of my crimson silk gown, and glanced at my reflection in one of the grand ballroom's towering mirrors. The picture of poise, elegant waves of dark hair cascading over one shoulder, a diamond necklace catching the light, a perfect, practiced smile on my lips. I looked like the perfect fiancé to Jasper Montgomery, the golden boy of Montgomery Enterprises, tall, charming, with a jawline that could probably cut glass. He had always known exactly what to say, exactly how to tilt his head when he smiled, exactly how to make people trust him, including me. For 5 years, I had been Sienna Caldwell, the devoted, graceful, and utterly oblivious fiancé, and in 5 minutes, I was about to become Sienna Caldwell, the woman he humiliated in front of half of North City's elite. The moment Jasper clinked his champagne glass, my stomach twisted. Every conversation in the ballroom halted. Dozens of eyes turned to us, guests, family, journalists, who had snuck in with the caterers. Jasper smiled at me, taking my hand. His grip was firm, but his fingers were cold. Then, with the confidence of a man who had clearly lost his mind, he said, "I can't do this anymore." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" The guests fell into a stunned silence. Somewhere in the distance, a waiter dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Jasper turned back to the crowd, speaking louder. "Sienna and we're not meant to be. The truth is, I've fallen in love with someone else." The floor tilted beneath me. My nails pressed into my palm, but I didn't flinch. I refused to. Then Jasper reached for her hand. "Camille Bennett." A hush fell over the room. Even the musicians stopped playing. Camille looked beautiful tonight. She was always beautiful, with her delicate features and big, innocent eyes. She was wearing a pale blue dress, soft, angelic, trustworthy, which was hilarious, considering she was standing there holding my fiancé's hand. I had known Camille for years. My family had sponsored her education, invited her into our home, treated her like a younger sister. And now, she had decided to thank me by stealing my future husband. Jasper's voice was full of fake sincerity. "Camille and we never meant to hurt anyone. But love is love, and we can't deny it any longer." I could hear my father's sharp inhale from across the room. My mother's wine glass snapped in her grip. For a single, fleeting second, I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but I had learned from my past life. So instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that could kill a man in his sleep. "Whoa, Jasper." My voice was smooth, amused. I turned slightly, letting my diamond earrings catch the light. "You should have just told me sooner. I could have saved money on the wedding invitations." Someone in the crowd choked on their drink. Camille's grip on Jasper's hand tightened. She probably thought I would slap her, cry, scream. Poor thing. She didn't realize she wasn't worth that much effort. I raised my champagne glass, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "To Jasper and Camille, may your love last longer than his father's last 3 marriages." A ripple of shocked laughter went through the room. My mother stifled a smirk. My father simply lifted his whiskey glass in approval. Jasper's parents, however, absolutely mortified. His father turned to him, jaw tight. "Are you insane?" Jasper hesitated, probably realizing, a little too late, that this wasn't going quite how he imagined. "Whoa, sweetheart. Did you really think I would beg?" With one final glance at Camille, I leaned in and whispered just for Jasper, "Enjoy your true love while you can. Because after this, you're going to need all the luck you can get." Then I turned on my heel, and walked away, leaving him standing there like an idiot holding a stolen prize. The second I stepped off the ballroom floor, my father caught up to me. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice gruff. I exhaled, smoothed my dress, and to my surprise I laughed. Not because I found it funny, but because I had just been given the greatest gift of all, freedom, and revenge was going to taste so sweet. I slipped out onto the balcony, the cold air biting at my skin. I should have felt humiliated, angry, devastated. Instead, I felt alive. That was when a deep voice behind me said, "That was one hell of a show." I turned to find Adrian Blackwood, lounging casually against the railing. Adrian was a storm wrapped in a custom suit, all sharp angles and unreadable expressions, a man who had built his empire from the ground up. Once our families had been close, but his cutthroat reputation had made my father wary of working with him. I narrowed my eyes. "Shouldn't you be inside, pretending to be appalled like the rest of them?" He smirked. "Whoa, I am appalled. I'm appalled that I didn't bring popcorn." Despite myself, I let out a short laugh. Adrian studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, you just became the most dangerous woman in this city." I arched a brow. "Whoa." He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "You're free now. No more distractions. No more playing the perfect wife to be." He tilted his head. "Which means it's time to stop reacting and start acting." I crossed my arms. "And what exactly do you suggest?" He smirked. "Whoa, sweetheart. The fun is just beginning." And just like that, Operation Make Jasper Regret His Existence was officially underway. As I stood there, the city lights stretching before me, I made a silent vow. Jasper Montgomery thought he had won. He thought he had humiliated me. But he had no idea. Because in this life, I wasn't the girl who lost. I was the girl who was about to take everything. The morning after the gala, the headlines were brutal. Billionaire heiress Sienna Caldwell publicly dumped by Jasper Montgomery. Golden couple no more. Montgomery's shocking confession leaves socialites stunned. Sienna Caldwell's chilling smile, the calm before the storm. The last one was my personal favorite. I scrolled through the articles, sipping my espresso as I sat in my father's private study, legs crossed, wearing the softest silk robe in my collection. If anyone expected me to be curled up in bed, crying over Jasper, they clearly didn't know me well enough. They would soon. "You're taking this well," my father said, watching me carefully from behind his desk. I turned to him and gave him a slow, deliberate smile. "I feel fantastic." My father leaned back, nodding approvingly. "Good. Because it's time to show those Montgomery bastards exactly what happens when they cross a Caldwell." That's when it hit me. I had wasted 5 years being Jasper's perfect fiancé, supporting him, standing by his side, helping his family's business like some dutiful little wife in training. Never again. This was my rebirth. And I was about to ruin him. Step 1. Acquire power. Step 2. Make the Montgomerys beg for mercy. Step 3. Ignore their begging. I dove into the business world with a vengeance. I started buying out small but crucial companies, the ones Jasper's family relied on for deals, supply chains, and investments. Most of them were struggling, on the verge of bankruptcy, and they were more than happy to take my money instead of the Montgomerys. With every acquisition, I tightened the noose around their empire. At board meetings, I walked in wearing sharp heels and sharper smiles, never once letting them see how much I was enjoying this. Jasper's father, Richard Montgomery, looked at me differently now, with fear. His son, still too stupidly arrogant to realize what was happening. Jasper's downfall didn't happen overnight. No, it happened beautifully, like a slow-burn drama that kept getting better with every episode. First, Montgomery Enterprises started hemorrhaging money, bad investments, missing contracts, a sudden loss of major partners. Gee, I wonder why. Then Jasper's relationship with Camille became tabloid hell. I may or may not have leaked a few rumors. Just little things. Like how Camille was getting cold feet. How she had started questioning her decision. It didn't take much to make Jasper spiral. He had never experienced true loss before. He was used to winning. But this time, he had picked the wrong woman to betray. If there was one person having more fun than me, it was Adrian Blackwood. He was everywhere, offering business advice, sending me snarky text messages, appearing at my meetings just to watch the Montgomerys suffer. One evening, he slid into the seat across from me at a high-end restaurant, his signature smirk in place. "I have to say, sweetheart, I'm impressed." I sipped my wine. "That makes one of us." His dark eyes gleamed. "You could have played the victim. Everyone expected you to." I tilted my head. "Victims don't win." Adrian let out a low chuckle. "Now that is a philosophy I can respect." He wasn't just playing along. He was invested in me. And I would be lying if I said I didn't feel something dangerous every time he looked at me like that. But I had bigger things to focus on, like how Jasper was drowning, and I was going to let him sink. It was an ordinary morning when the news broke. Camille Bennett had vanished. Gone. Without a trace. The media went into a frenzy. Jasper was desperate, pacing in front of reporters, demanding answers. His one true love had abandoned him. I watched from the comfort of my office, sipping my latte. Whoa, Jasper, you thought the universe was going to reward you for betraying me? How cute. I didn't care where Camille had gone. I was too busy watching the Montgomery empire crumble. And I still wasn't done. Not even close. Revenge wasn't just about making Jasper suffer. It was about making him realize what he had lost. I wasn't the weak little girl who had been discarded like yesterday's news. I was the woman he would spend the rest of his life regretting. And as I sat in my office, signing the next business deal that would push his family one step closer to ruin, I allowed myself one indulgence. I picked up my phone, typed a short, simple message, sent it to Jasper. You should have just stayed faithful. Then I smiled. Because this was only the beginning. There was a certain poetic justice in seeing Richard Montgomery, one of the most feared businessmen in North City, sitting in my office like a man awaiting execution. He looked older than I remembered, stressed, tired, defeated. A few months ago, he wouldn't have spared me more than a polite nod at a gala. Now, he was begging for my help. Sienna, Richard said, forcing a smile, we've had our differences, but let's be reasonable. The business world is unpredictable. We both know how quickly things can change. I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. I knew exactly how quickly things could change. I had been the one to change them. What are you asking, Richard? I said, twirling my pen between my fingers. He exhaled sharply. A partnership. A merger. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. A merger? He wanted me to save Montgomery Enterprises? I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. Let me get this straight. You're asking me, the woman your son humiliated, to swoop in and rescue your collapsing empire? Richard swallowed. Business is business, Sienna. Ah, there it was. The classic Montgomery arrogance, still lingering even in desperation. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Then I leaned back, and gave him a sweet, devastating smile. No. His face darkened. Sienna, be reasonable. No, Richard. My voice was silk-wrapped steel. See, in my past life, metaphorically speaking of course, I made the mistake of thinking the Montgomerys were worth saving. I gave you power. I gave you trust. I stood up, circling my desk like a predator. And do you know what you did with that power? I smiled coldly. You raised a son who mistook my kindness for weakness. Richard's jaw clenched. Jasper was a fool. But he's still young. He can learn. I let out a soft laugh. Richard, darling, your son couldn't learn how to zip up his own pants properly, let alone run an empire. His face turned red. I sat back down and crossed my legs. Now, if you'd like me to buy you out completely, I might consider it. But let's be clear, I won't save your company. I'll own it. The defeat in his eyes was delicious. And then he said the one thing I had been waiting for. We'll do whatever you want. Just take Jasper back. Bingo. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was throwing a goddamn parade. So this was how far he had fallen. The golden boy, the perfect heir, the man who had once looked at me like I was disposable, now reduced to a bargaining chip in his father's desperate negotiations. How poetic. I exhaled, feigning deep thought. You know, Richard, once upon a time, I might have considered it. Richard's face lit up. Hopeful. I leaned in. But then I remembered, I have taste. His expression crumbled. And just like that, the Montgomery dynasty was over. I knew Jasper would come. The moment his father left my office in utter humiliation, I counted the minutes. By evening, my secretary informed me that Jasper was in the lobby, begging to see me. I took my time. Let him wait. When I finally walked into the meeting room, Jasper looked terrible. Gone was the polished, arrogant air. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his hair a mess, his eyes hollow. I would have felt sorry for him, if I still cared. Sienna. His voice was hoarse, desperate. I was wrong. I raised an eyebrow. You'll have to be more specific. You've been wrong about a lot of things. He flinched. Camille's gone. The company's collapsing. My parents. I held up a hand. Let me stop you right there. Are you about to tell me that after publicly humiliating me, replacing me like a worn-out accessory, and ruining your own life, you suddenly realized you made a mistake? Jasper swallowed hard. I never stopped loving you, Sienna. I actually laughed. Oh, that's rich. Truly. I mean it. His voice cracked. When I saw you walking away at the gala, I thought you'd be devastated, but you weren't. You were powerful, unshaken. I realized I made a mistake, that I should have. Whoa, Jasper, I sighed, shaking my head. You're not in love with me. You're in love with the idea of me. The woman who was supposed to make your life easier. The one who was always there to support you. He stepped closer. I can change. I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Then I burst out laughing. Whoa, Jasper. That's adorable. I patted his cheek lightly. But no. His face crumbled. I stepped past him, heading toward the door. You were right about one thing though. He turned, hope flickering in his eyes. I was powerful. I was unshaken. I glanced over my shoulder. And that's why I don't need you. Then I walked away. And this time, Jasper was the one left behind. The next morning, the headlines were glorious. Caldwell Enterprises officially acquires Montgomery Empire. Sienna Caldwell emerges as industry's youngest powerhouse. Once a betrayed fiancé, now the queen of the business world. Jasper Montgomery spotted leaving former headquarters. The fall of a golden heir. I leaned back in my chair, reading the news as I sipped my coffee. Adrian Blackwood strolled into my office, glancing at my screen. Damn, you didn't just destroy him. You buried him? I smirked. He had it coming. Adrian chuckled, shaking his head. And what now? Your grand revenge is complete. What's next? I set down my coffee and met his gaze. Now, I smiled. Now I win. The world had finally learned what I had known all along. Jasper Montgomery was nothing without me. His company? Mine. His reputation? In ruins. His dignity? Non-existent. Poetic justice, really. For the first time in years, I was truly free. No more obligations. No more carefully crafted smiles at society events. No more being someone's perfect fiancé. I could do whatever I wanted. And yet, there was one thing left that I hadn't figured out. Adrian Blackwood. Because somehow, while I had been orchestrating Jasper's downfall, Adrian had managed to become a part of my life in ways I hadn't expected. And that was dangerous. It happened at a rooftop bar. The kind of place where the elite came to celebrate victories and drown their failures in overpriced whiskey. Adrian and I had met for drinks, something that had become a habit lately. We were both creatures of ambition, after all. Always scheming, always plotting. But tonight felt different. There was no more revenge to plan. No more enemies to crush. It was just us. He swirled his drink, watching me carefully. So, now that you've burned the Montgomery Empire to the ground, what's next for Sienna Caldwell? I smirked, taking a sip of my wine. I suppose I should set my sights on world domination next. He chuckled. Tempting. But I meant personally. I raised an eyebrow. Personally? His gaze turned sharp. You've won, Sienna. The game is over. What do you want now? That was the problem, wasn't it? For so long my world had been about revenge. I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. I looked at Adrian then. Really looked at him. The man who had stood by me through all of this. The man who had never doubted me. The man who had been waiting for me to realize what was right in front of me. And suddenly I knew. I wanted him. But Adrian Blackwood was no fool. He leaned in, his voice low. You're thinking too hard, Caldwell. I smirked. Maybe. Want me to make it easier for you? He asked. I tilted my head. And how exactly would you do that? Adrian's lips curved into that infuriating, charming as hell smirk. Then, before I could say another word, he leaned in and kissed me. And just like that, everything clicked. I kissed him back without hesitation, my fingers tangling in his jacket, pulling him closer. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. He looked down at me, his voice husky. That clear things up for you? I exhaled, smiling for the first time in a long time that had nothing to do with revenge. Yes, I murmured. I think it does. I didn't need revenge anymore. But that didn't mean I couldn't have one last moment of satisfaction. So, a week later, Adrian and I attended an elite gala together, dressed in a custom designer gown, arm in arm with the most powerful man in the city. I knew exactly what I was doing. And Jasper? He was there, alone, watching as I thrived without him. I caught his gaze from across the room and lifted my champagne glass in a silent toast. He looked away first. Victory never tasted so sweet. Months later, Adrian proposed. Not in some grand public spectacle. Not in a desperate plea for attention. But in the quiet comfort of our penthouse, just the two of us. I don't need a yes right now, he said, holding out the ring. I just need to know if you can see a future with me. I looked at him, this man who had been by my side through every twist and turn, and smiled. Yes, Adrian. I took the ring, slipped it onto my finger. Because this time, I wasn't saying yes out of obligation. This time, I was saying yes to my own future. One where I was unstoppable. One where I was loved for who I truly was. One where I was finally, truly free. And this time, I chose myself first. The end. If you had the chance to rewrite your past and get ultimate revenge on someone who wronged you, What would your master plan be? Drop your best revenge plot in the comments.